Hello game fans and welcome to another interview on Game Anglia. I'm here with the legendary Brenda Romero. She gave the keynote talk this morning and I'm going to be asking her a few questions about her life in games, game design in general and the game industry as well. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you.
Now, first of all, I know that you're a huge fan of D&D.
I am indeed.
And for a lot of the younger game developers that are here today, how important do you think it is to play board games as well as video games?
Oh, I think it's integral. I've played so many board games, and we have a huge collection in the office. And I even find that a lot of people who come into the game industry being purely digital game fans end up just by being in a game company board game players themselves. I think it's incredibly important. You get, especially for game designers, because this is where really you can see the rules. You can see exactly how games are working behind the scenes before they're covered with code and anything else. And these rules really show us how players engage with the game and how we can create that possibility space where gameplay occurs.
Okay. And you've created a number of well-known games. One of the most talked about is Train.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you were deciding to make Train as a board game, what was the decision to make it more of a tabletop game than an actual video game?
Well, I think if it were, first of all, I really wanted to make something I wanted to make something from scratch by myself. And I couldn't see a way to make Train well as a digital game. Now, I'm sure it could be made well as a digital game, but somehow it lost that sense of presence for me that you can really only have when you're playing face-to-face with other human beings. And the most important thing for me was creating a sense of complicity. Will you, or will anybody, blindly follow the rules? Will you blindly follow the rules, even if you remove them from a typewriter that itself is quite a loaded piece? And the answer is many people will, but I don't think, the game couldn't simply, it's not that I don't think, I know the game couldn't be as effective if it were anything other than precisely what it is. And creating it on a shattered window where you're physically placing pawns inside of boxcars, that to me was just essential, absolutely required, and there's no way that I could duplicate that digitally.
Okay, and so when creating that, you're obviously trying to stir an emotion and move the player. So when we do take that over to the digital sense, how do you see social responsibility sort of being taught in game design? Only because I've played games where you find out that your mother's an alcoholic, or you play a game and there's been a death in the family. So where do you see social responsibility in game design?
When you say social responsibility, you mean covering certain topics?
Yes, yeah. So instead of just games as an entertainment, but also games as an educator as well.
Well, I guess, yeah, I would, if we took out the word games and we put in the word books, where is social responsibility in books? I think we should have the same in games, meaning I can make games about whatever I want to make games about. If I choose to make games about very difficult topics, I have to own the feelings that could potentially generate in people. So if they see or play one of my games and it causes very strong feelings in them, which they do, that's something that I feel like it's my responsibility as the creator to receive those feelings. But I don't think that I have a responsibility to not cover a topic because it might be upsetting. In fact, when I started making these games and I wanted to make, what I call them documentary games, and it's fine to make documentaries about all these things, and I believe that if I'm being respectful to the topic and I'm being respectful to the people that were impacted in it, and I'm really doing everything I can to learn about that experience, and I can create something that I feel okay having created, to me, that's the extent of the responsibility. There's lots of games. For instance, there was one game developer who pointed out, many more than one game developer, but to what extent? Let me think. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. in a lot of games that are about the Wild West or about colonizing one place, right? And this is analog and digital games. We're wiping out Native Americans, right? Like that's horrible. Or if we're representing World War II and we're just killing a bunch of people, right? So if they're games documenting difficult moments in human history, it's a tricky question, because I mean, on the one hand, I sort of feel like we don't have any responsibility except the responsibility to accept the feelings that they generate and to not blow those feelings off. I also think if we're covering difficult material, that you have a tremendous responsibility to make sure that you understand that material.
Yeah.
I not necessarily present it from both sides. There's not two sides to train. There is one very clear side to train. Yeah. And the point is strongly made. And I have other games where I've made a similar one-sided strong point. But I guess it's the biggest responsibility is a responsibility to the subject matter, to make sure that you really do research it and that you do your best by it.
Because I seriously doubt that, say, the new Call of Duty World War II game ever sort of touches upon mass graves or any kind of gas chambers or anything like that.
Well, but I mean, and should it, right? Like, I think there is a notion that I don't think we have to do that, right? I think Saving Private Ryan, if we take a look at that, Saving Private Ryan, my Uncle John was actually one of the people that was involved literally in Saving Private Ryan. And it was four men from northern New York that were featured in that movie, and the one surviving one. It wasn't actually they had to go find him, they actually had to get him out. And there was all kinds of stuff they could have shown during that film that wasn't shown during that film, but that was his vision, that was Spielberg's vision that he wanted to show. And likewise, if we don't need to necessarily say this is the subject that we're covering. This war of mine is very, very different,
yes,
and presents something very, very different than, say, Call of Duty. Call of Duty is about entertainment. This war of mine is about entertainment in the context of also giving you some difficult, also actually making you think about the things that you're doing.
Yeah.
It's likewise, I loved Papers, Please. I thought just did this so perfectly, because Papers, Please, I found myself wanting to master things, so wanting to do what a game makes you want to do to become good at something, but feeling like a horrible person, because the more I mastered it, the worse I felt about what I was doing in the game.
Absolutely.
So that juxtaposition actually gave me a lot of cause for reflection. And so games have, I mean, what is it that the designer is trying to do when they're presenting a game? And I don't think Call of Duty needs to have those things. And in fact, I think Modern Warfare and the No Russians thing, and the No Russian scene, like that with, if people haven't played it, I don't want to wreck it. But I just thought that was also kind of a masterful stroke there.
Yeah. And so, well, in the games industry in general, it's always sort of been the rebel. It's always it's been the one that's been doing things a bit differently. But like the film industry, who had their sort of renaissance, where all of a sudden they took on the difficult issues and social responsibility. Do you think that the games industry is due like a grown-up moment, like a Schindler's List moment? Do you think are we in that time right now, or?
Well, I would say, like, I don't think that there's anybody, like, I don't want all games to go to the edge of social responsibility or presenting, like, I would be so sad if the whole industry decided, let's all make games, like, John describes some of my games as games that make people cry, and they have, and they do, but I don't want all games to be like that, right? I want to have fun in games. I want to have the moments like I had in Her Story, or most recently Edith Finch, where I just thought, man, what a masterwork. Or Inside, I thought was incredible. Or Overwatch, right? Like, Overwatch just added an Irish character who says actually things that actually Irish people would say, right? And so I don't want everybody to go to that specific direction. Oh, shoot, now I just forgot. I forgot the original part of, what was the original part?
It was Schindler's List moment.
Right, sorry. So for us to have, okay, I've got to come back to Schindler's List, but we're not fully ready to do that, right? And when globally games are viewed like books are viewed, then maybe we'll be at that moment. But there are countries still where games, if a game would be available for adults, or if a game like might get a mature or an AO rating, that game is refused classification and literally cannot be sold in the country. So games are largely still viewed in some places as for kids. So until games, and that for kids thing, especially if that country is a major market for games, it becomes financially problematic. So, you know, say like the ESRB, if that's a ceiling on what games can actually go out there, then we end up having a difficult situation where you're saying, well, you know, I can't sell this game at retail, I can't sell as many copies because I want to put this content in it. Like we, in games, literally couldn't even have the level of drama that you would see in many PG-13 films. So we're not quite there yet because the full range of content isn't necessarily available to us. And even Schindler's List, like, you know, I've had, even, as much as that's often discussed as a masterwork, when we were talking earlier about Call of Duty not having mass graves in it, with Schindler's List, how many Jewish people die in that film?
Yeah.
Now, having made a game about that is, you know, to me that is the single most tragic period that in human history.
Yeah.
Right? In Schindler's List itself, like it I would say, glosses over a lot of the phenomenally hard facts about that. I am often surprised when I show train how many people don't recognize what it is symbolic of, right? And so they just say, oh, it's just, you know, it's a game on a shattered glass window, but they have no idea why it is. And then there's other people who walk up to it and know precisely what it is when they see it.
Okay, and so you've been working with husband John now for Romero Games. Has working with John changed your perspective or approach to game design? Sort of coming as both gaming legends, wizardry, Doom, and then sort of coming together, has that changed how you now make games?
God, it's so bizarre to be called a game legend.
Well, you got an award just at GDC or something, right?
Yeah, I know, but it's so funny. One way that it's changed how I design is John does something that I would never do. I've been accused by, rightly so, by a friend of mine who I've worked with for 10 plus years, Ian Schreiber, and we've collaborated on a number of things. And Ian has called me, I'm not sure precisely the term, basically a black box designer, where I'll think about something in my head, and I have this whole discussion apparently with a committee in my head, and then I say, here's what we're going to do. So if you say, Brenda, I'd like a game about doing interviews with people and how to make those interviews good and not good, I would say, okay, let me think about it and I'll come back to you. So then I go away and I think about it, and everything, all the work through it is happening in my head, and then I'll give you the final product. John, if you asked him, would start right now and he would do it out loud.
Yeah.
And he would and I would be very much like, I don't want to talk to you until my design is completely finished and it's fully in my head, because somehow something you're going to say might make me feel like it's going to get screwed up. Which is just the exact opposite of him. He is happy designing openly. And so I've actually changed to be more like that. Specifically, the game that I'm working on right now, I design it very openly with the team, up to saying, okay, so here's this pretty much D&Ding the game, DMing the game. Say, okay, so here's the situation, and here's where we are, here's who you are, here's what's going on, what do you want to do? And I'm looking for the verbs of the game.
Yeah.
And so letting the team have tremendous input. Like just before I came into this, I was answering feedback from the tech director, and he had just some great gameplay suggestions, right? And I don't, and hopefully other people don't want to close down any of that by making it seem like they're not receptive to it or like, I've got it. But, that I very much learned from John. So just his design process and being more open to that. What else? I'm sure there's a lot of things, I mean, it's like I've learned a lot about level design, not surprisingly. A lot about running a business. John is on his 9th or 10th startup, and this is my 3rd. So I've learned a lot about that from him, a lot about, game industry highs and lows. But mostly it's just having a lot of fun in the collaboration. I tend to be pretty intense and pretty focused. And, John, an interesting thing is, I guess it sometimes that it might seem like John is goofing around, or just having a lot of fun, and everybody's having a good laugh in the office. And I suppose one way you could look at it is, oh, Jesus is wasting time. But creating games in an environment of fun and having a team that enjoys being together, likes hanging out together, likes playing games together, that's absolutely critical. We're not there trying to just build a stack of bricks. We're trying to create a digital environment that people want to come into. And likewise, to be able to do that, we really need a physical environment and a culture that people enjoy being in. Yeah. And he's really good at that. So I've hopefully lightened up on my intensity. Although
like
4 espressos a day probably isn't lightening up, but
it sounds more like a family than a team. It's kind of very much.
I hope so. I mean, like all of my coworkers, I really like them. I genuinely really like them. Like they're my friends, and we just hired a new guy, and he's on another floor. So we're the building we're in. We have 3 floors. We used to have 1 floor. And then we grew, so we had to get a bigger building. And so now we have 3 floors. And I feel like I haven't gotten as much of a chance to know this guy. Yeah. But I eventually will, because we're our Christmas party. We're all going to a hotel for the weekend.
You'll learn a lot about each other at the Christmas party.
I hope so. But when we're interviewing somebody, it is very much like can you do the job we're asking you to do, right? But it's also like what I want you as a friend, because I'm going to be spending 8 hours a day with you 5 days a week.
So that kind of leads me on to another question then. So I've noticed that Romero Games are recruiting, and you've taken on a couple of new staff. So for the new game developers here at Game Anglia, what kind of qualities, just outside of a degree, do you look for in new recruits?
The number one thing that I look for is games. Have you finished games? Which is one of the reasons that we often say, make a lot of small games, not your big, your magnum. You've learned how to code, magnum opus time. It's make a lot of small games. If you have to learn something in code, make a small game while you're learning about that thing. And I like to see finished games. I don't want to see a bunch of abandoned games, unless you can say, this was a prototype. I worked on it up to this specific point. It just wasn't fun, so I killed it and moved on. But I learned the following things from it and moved on to this one. But there will be in the college pile, there'll be the college pile will go into 2 different ones. Have made games, have not made games. Goodbye. There's too many of these. So this pile that's made games, it's about seeing the range of games, what they've done. I encourage, there's so many opportunities now. Game jams. Also another thing, and this is interesting. I don't know why. I don't feel like enough college students clue on to this, that when they graduate from a college course, or a college program or degree program, when they graduate, I'm going to see, let's just say there's 20 people in the class. You've all had the same projects. So I'm going to get 20 of these, and usually you will get a couple from the same school. So you'll have, each of you will have the same 4 projects. And so I can kind of weigh those, but it'll be really easy to see the person who stood out. She went to game jams and she's got 3 more games. Her games look more polished. She's tried interactive narrative. She's worked on just a range of things. And so bear in mind that just the projects, if you only have coursework as part of your portfolio, you are fitting in with so many other students. But if you actually go beyond that and participate in game jams and take that time while you have the time, that's so much better.
And
there's one other thing I just thought of. Sorry.
Nice, okay.
Another thing too, I think a lot of students, and not just a lot of students, I think all of us, it's easy to become disheartened when you make a game that's not fun, or you put it up on early access and 100 people play it, right? 100 people. So you think like, oh, really? All that work for nothing? But remember that most people who've had success, for them it was 10 years. Like Doom was John's 80th game, right? So it's there's a lot of time you have to put into polishing the diamonds, right? And so don't give up. Get all of early game development is getting your bad games out of the way.
And I guess there's a lesson there to learn about marketing as well. If you are going to release a game, make sure people know about it as well. So.
Yeah, Colin Larkin, he's with Gambrinus. He did Gilded Engineering. Well, he and his team did Gilded Engineering, and he has a talk that I think is fantastic. It's called Share Your Games, and it was all about his creation of Gilded Engineering that he did publicly, regularly sharing it every single week. You know, if you're looking for somebody to invite for next year, I've seen this talk 3 times. I'm a huge fan of it. I think once you've released games, like we can't talk about the game we're working on now, right? But in the early days, getting that feedback from the public, building an audience, Minecraft did the same sort of thing. But columns talk about sharing your games and how it builds a community for your game, but it also gets you within the community and gets you great feedback. This talk is so invaluable for anybody starting out in games.
Yeah, sure. We'll definitely have him along. And just to carry on talking about Romero games, so I know you can't talk about your current project, but the Gunman Taco, that was done with your son Donovan.
Yeah.
How was it to sort of share your knowledge, and how did you bring out the game in him?
He not surprisingly, he's been raised in a game development house, right? So we always talk to our kids like we would talk to other game developers. So not as we would talk to kids. Like if he says a game is fun, we wouldn't go, "That's great." We would say, "Why do you think it's fun? What mechanics are interesting to you? What's the core loop? I haven't heard of the game." So as a result, he thinks like a designer and he evaluates like a designer. So working with him on Gunman Taco Truck it was fantastic. And he never really had any difficulties. He came up with the core loop, the whole game. It was there. There was no need for us to polish or tweak that in any way. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He had a really good core loop there. The only thing that we had to do was provide balance for it. And because he was 9 when he came up with it, so his idea of what game balance is. Although we should release the Donovan edition where you just mow through people immediately and get rewarded with far too much cash. But that balance stuff, that's probably the most challenging thing to introduce. He's working on his sequel to Gunman now. So, and who knows, he might go on and do something else. But he's been making games since he was 6.
Yeah,
and we have all of the games he's made. He wrote them. He was so eager to make games, but he didn't know how to code, so he would actually write them in books. Like, here's the screen, press play, and he would write press play, and you turn the page, and there's the rest of it. So he's made several games like that, and we held a launch party for the first one he did.
Oh, fantastic. So is the second one maybe encourage more European destinations?
I don't know. This one he's going to Canada. It follows on with Gunman Taco Truck, so it's Gunman Ice Cream Truck.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So he's currently working on it, but that's the current thing of the current thing behind the game. So we'll see when we get to that.
Well, I mentioned Europe because Romero Games is in Galway in Ireland, and I just wondered if you could tell me a little bit, what's the game scene like? I know there's Blizzard there, there's Zynga, so how do you see the game industry in Ireland at the moment?
Well, we originally came to Ireland on was a Fulbright recipient to go to Ireland to study its game institutions, government policies, game industry, and just game developers in general. So the goal of that was really just to study it, make some recommendations, write a report. And instead, what ended up happening was absolutely loved the game development community in Ireland, thought it was a great place to be, and decided to go back to California, sell everything, and move to Ireland. So I think the community in Ireland is absolutely wonderful. Like you mentioned, there's some big companies there, but the indie community is just incredible. It's really well networked. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows what everybody's making for the most part, and it's just an incredibly tight-knit, super supportive scene. So I'm thrilled to be a part of it. It's one of the big reasons that we wanted to move there. Absolutely.
Okay. And so you obviously can't talk about the game at the moment, but you have recruited some new staff.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to go fantasy game here. So if I was to say, right, okay, I'm going to commission you to make the new Wizardry game, how would you sort of envisage Wizardry? How would you envisage Wizardry being reimagined and for a modern audience? So
if I were being commissioned to actually do that, it's funny because part of it is the designer and what the designer would like to do, and then the other part of it is what the players would expect. So the second you say that, my immediate thought is like, oh my god, like I had 20 years of swords. And so I would probably want to do a party-based game that was not dealing with swords. And even like the later Wizardries, like Wizardry 8, there were vending machines and you crash landed on a planet in your spaceship while still having swords and plate mail. So it was very space opera-y. I don't know, I think some of the games that, I think like the Divinity series, I think they're doing an excellent job at reimagining things like that. I would immediately try to employ Josh Sawyer, who is one of the best system designers, if not the best system designer for RPGs that I know of in the game industry. So I mean, it would be really fun. I would probably try to just get like a dream team together. But I don't know. Like I feel like there were different angles that people went with that. Like Diablo made David Brevik is the designer of Diablo, and he reimagined RPGs in an accessible way. That just an industry, a genre that seemed to be getting smaller and smaller and smaller every year, just suddenly exploded. Or Rob Pardo's work on World of Warcraft, having an RPG open to millions of people. And I should say, of course, Ralph Koster's work on Ultima Online and Richard Garriott's work. Oh, there's so many things. You could create a super dream team. I don't know. I think. So
get you a pad.
Yeah, I think if somebody said, here, this is just sort of a blank check, a respectful blank check, meaning not just woo. Here's a blank check. Make what you want to make. I think if I made anything, I would make a traditional wizardry pen and paper RPG.
Wow. Okay.
I think that's like because I feel like I did everything I ever wanted to do in the digital world with wizardry. I mean, that was like 20 years on a team. Great people. I mean, certainly, and I can't claim credit for it, right? Like there's Robert Woodhead and Andrew Greenberg and David Bradley and a whole host of people that worked on Wizardry 8, that we all worked on Wizardry 8 together. But I feel like everything I ever wanted to do in the Wizardry series was done, but the idea of doing a pencil and paper version, that feels like or a board game version of Wizardry, that feels really pretty cool. Oh, so that idea I'd still be excited about that idea.
And my last question, I've been asking all the speakers here today. So I heard you talk this morning. It was a fantastic talk. People will be able to watch it online. But you mentioned how you started in the game industry in a loo, in a toilet.
I was out of the toilet, in fairness, but it was in the bathroom. Yeah.
And so you should go and watch that talk. But if all of a sudden you were in that or outside that loo, and then a time travel vortex opens up and you step out and you can give yourself a bit of wise words to your younger self, what would you say?
Oh man, that's so easy. I had that answer just like that. Leave. And not leave the bathroom, but wash your hands. Yeah, definitely wash your hands. I was with the same company for 20 years. And one of the important things is you're always trying to learn from new people. And after 20 years in a company, you've probably learned all that there may be much more to learn there, but after 20 years, you've learned what you're going to learn.
Yeah.
You've risen to the point that you're going to rise to. So unless you own stock in a company, right, or you're one of the owners, some of the smartest things I did, like I was working with other people who knew more than I did about certain things. And that's where I really started to see myself grow as a designer. So that's what I would tell myself, is just leave.
Don't stay too long.
Don't stay too long. And stay as long as you're learning, and you're learning good things. And I also think, in my early career, there's, that maybe sometimes I sort of accepted the known okay, instead of possibly taking a chance on what might be better, right? It's that sense of safety and security in not exploring other opportunities. So yeah, that was it. Just leave, go.
Yeah, because I guess in the industry there's some bad press because a company gets together, they make a game, and then they disband. and it's like, oh well, is there any job security? But I guess what you're saying is that's a good thing. It's good to just work on a game, learn what you need to learn, then move to another team, move to another studio, even to another country.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. But thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
My pleasure.
It's been lovely to meet you.
Yeah, same here.
And yes, if this video has been useful, then please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll be back with another interview very soon.